Lighting here will soon be. Yeah, it doesn't work. We were here that night. They usually call those things like ticket for laptops and something. She's like, I don't know what they're. And she asked me, I was like, I don't know how to put in a ticket, so no, that's just not something I did. You was highly busting it in terms of no, my whole version of ticket is please ask them. I was like, do I stop on my computer? Well, for me, climbing up. Yeah, maybe don't consider climbing. I'm absolutely not. I know. It's 2 or 5 minutes from the time.
Hello. Whoa, there's a hole there. Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you so much for being here at the George Washington Presidential Library. I always like to ask, are there any first-time visitors? So many good new first hands. I love that. Thank you so much. For those of you I don't know, my name is Lindsay Chervinsky. I'm the executive director of the George Washington Presidential Library. As always, I would like to thank the Ford Motor Company because their foundation generously supports these talks, makes them free and available to you, and allows us to bring wonderful scholars here to the library to share their work and their knowledge. So we are incredibly grateful for that. For tonight's program, if you are new to us, we use a very fun QR code system to take audience questions because we want you to be a part of the conversation as well. You will see a QR code like this in the corner. And if you take out your phone and open the camera app, it will automatically zoom in on that and take you to a website where you can enter your question. You can do that. This will be on all the slides. You can do that at any point throughout the evening, and then I will have a list of questions so you don't have to remember it for the end. If you are interested in planning your second visit to the library or your 102nd, depending on who you are, we have a couple of upcoming programs I'd like to tell you about. Our next Ford Evening Book Talk will be on July 22nd, and that will be with Dr. Karen Wolf talking about her new book, Lineage, Genealogy and the Power of Connection in Early America. And then our next lunch at the library will be on July 24th with Lauren S. Molds, who is exploring how AI is revolutionizing archival transcription and analysis. Now, selfishly speaking, we wanted to know how we could better incorporate artificial intelligence into our work, and so we invited him and thought you might also want to learn more about it too. So it is now my pleasure to introduce to you our speakers tonight. I am thrilled so many of you are here because this was sort of a crazy idea that was my brainchild, thinking this was the 250th anniversary of tonight of Washington arriving in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Tomorrow morning, he visited with the troops for the first time and issued his second general order on July 4th, which we will talk about. And so I was thinking about how to put together this program, and I thought, who better than to do that than friends and people I enjoy spending time with? And so I am delighted to introduce you to my friends. So first, Dr. Kate Lemay is the director of the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center of the Army War College, which is the premier archive of the U.S. Army. The center was ranked by Newsweek as one of the top 10 best free museums in 2025. So they also have a wonderful new exhibit for the 250th. I highly recommend taking a visit if you haven't already. Kate is a Fulbright scholar and a renowned and award-winning author herself. She was previously at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery and has written a number of wonderful books on Franco-American memory and World War II. She earned her PhD in American art history and American studies and a BA in French and art history from Syracuse University. Dr. Ricardo Herrera is a visiting professor of military history at the U.S. Army War College. You should sense a theme here with tonight's experts. And also an award-winning historian. He is the author of Feeding Washington's Army, Surviving the Valley Forge Winter of 1778, which is available outside for sale, and For Liberty and the Republic, The American Citizen as Soldier. He's working on a couple of forthcoming books, including one that will be down the road rode on the 1778 and 1779 campaigns for Savannah. So we will be eagerly awaiting that and nudging him not so gently to bring it to us once he's ready. He is a graduate of Marquette University and the University of California, Los Angeles, and he was previously a research fellow here at Mount Vernon when he was working on his work. So we are always thrilled to be able to welcome research fellows back to the library. For those of you, I know there are some in the crowd, in October 2024, he was elected as an honorary member of the Pennsylvania State Society of the Cincinnati. So I know we have some members here. He also is a veteran himself, so it is helpful to have that perspective in addition to the academic one. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kate Lemay and Dr. Ricardo Herrera. I have unmuted. Excellent. And I will now give you both your reminder to give your standard disclaimer before we forget.
Oh, go ahead, Rick.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So nothing that Kate and I say tonight represents the views of the U.S. government, Department of Defense, or the U.S. Army War College. Everything that we blather on about is only our thoughts and our thoughts alone. Now we've got the boilerplate out. Oh boy.
He has it memorized, and I'm so new to the War College that I was like, you say it.
And you can just say ditto. It's perfect. So tonight is, we often celebrate the July 4th anniversary of 1776. I would argue that the anniversaries of 1775 are actually more important in some ways. But let's perhaps set the scene for what was happening at this point. We know that Washington goes to take command of the army, which means that an army exists. So perhaps let's set the stage with why did Congress create an army when the United States had not yet been declared and independence was still a year in the future?
Okay, and that's interesting the way that Lindsay presented this. One of the first things that the political leaders of any country do when they declare independence, when they declare that this country is in existence, is to raise an army. The Continental Congress kind of did it backward. It's like, you know what? Let's raise an army. And then a year later, maybe we should declare independence. I think that what they were doing was demonstrating to themselves, to other Americans, but also to Parliament, how serious they were in their intent in the defense of traditional English rights and liberties. It's later on going to develop into a war for independence, political independence, not freedom, because they're free already, but for independence. And so the army serves as an emblem and a realization of the colonial struggle for the defense of their rights. And this is, they adopt the New Englanders besieging Boston. They raise 10 companies of riflemen out of Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, and that becomes the first Continental Army. There are actually 5 of them, if you count them.
Didn't Massachusetts go to the Continental Congress and ask them to help? Is that right?
They were. They wanted to make this as much of a continental struggle, yeah. A continent, we're all in this together. It's going to take a while, and the Army exhibits this, it demonstrates it as the various regiments of the Continental Army are raised. And I'm not going to go through all the iterations because the numbering is truly mind-boggling and goofy.
Gets overwhelming.
Yeah.
So Congress decides to create this army. They decide they need someone to run it. They are thinking about who to take command, and John Adams engineers the nomination of George Washington. I posit that there are 3 reasons that George Washington is the 3 tangible reasons. There are lots of intangibles, but there are 3 tangible reasons. First, he was born in the United States, or what would become the United States, and never had an official commission in the British Army, so loyalty was not questioned. B, did I do 1 or A? Whatever numbering system I used, the second one of that, he had no helpful. If you are going to have a general, they should probably have a little bit of a knowledge about what they're doing. And the third, whatever system I was using, he was from Virginia. And Virginia had to be included because, to Kate's point, Massachusetts was seen as the site of the troublemakers. The Bostonians were the rabble-rousers, and this needed to be a national conflict. To what extent do you think those were the three qualities? To what extent did I miss anything? Tell me about Washington taking command.
I think you're right, but I think importantly that if we have, do we have art of that? Because Washington looks like a general.
Oh, yeah.
This is important.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's this thing called comportment, how one carries oneself. George Washington is, not to put too fine a point, he's the super action hero of British North America in the 1770s.
I agree with that. And I think that he had the temperament to really make it about the cause and not about the persona, the sort of cult of personality. He wasn't really interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, he was at an early stage demonstrating his dedication to republicanism, lowercase r, not modern political parties. And when he attends the Second Continental Congress, what's he dressed in? He's wearing the uniform of the Fairfax County Associators, blue and buff.
Yep, there you go.
You can see right there.
Just in case anyone forgot that he had military experience.
From the French and Indian Wars.
Yes.
He was a colonel, right, when he was ranked in. What's interesting to me in some of the research I did in preparing for this talk is he engaged with General Gage of Boston, the British forces, and this general refused to acknowledge the ranks of the colonial army of their officers. And Washington was like, hey, you know what? This is the uncorrupted choice of a free people. So how dare you insult our officers when you have, a totally different kind of organizing rationale. And I thought that was, do you know about that, Rick? I thought that was really interesting.
Well, the one that I'm most familiar with is what comes later in the New York campaign in 1776.
Do it. Let me pause there. So I want to set the stage a little bit for people. So
Getting ahead.
we're going to go chronologically here. And so where are my pictures of my, so Washington arrives tonight, July 2nd, 1775 in Cambridge. The next morning, he goes to meet with his troops. He reviews, one of the first orders is they are to gather and they are to be reviewed by their commander-in-chief. This is roughly what Boston Harbor would have looked like at the time. We actually have these watercolors right now on display in the museum. I highly recommend taking a look if you haven't already. They just went up this week and they are spectacularly beautiful. In addition to a wonderful map of the military situation in Boston. So it's an excellent new exhibit. So what did Washington see when he first met with this ragtag group of?
You didn't see much. I don't think.
I mean, that first illustration that you saw where everyone's neatly attired, get that out of your minds. This is the military equivalent of a pickup game on the basketball court. I mean, they're dressed in whatever they're dressed in. They're armed with whatever they're armed with. They're coming and going as they please. Washington's first impression is not good. They're an exceeding dirty and nasty lot, which is what he refers to his future soldiers.
Yeah, that's a direct quote. Dirty is a direct quote.
Yep. That's not the way that you start off. Washington's learning his job. He's learning how to command. He's learning how to earn the respect of what's going to be a citizen's army. It's a Republican, lowercase army that embodies, at least of the New Englanders, no one more emphatically, almost a democratic spirit. That's something, this is antithetical to what Washington has known and grown up with. He's got to learn this continental stuff.
Yeah, and I think they were looking at him as that, like, okay, who's this refined guy who, like, I can't relate to at all? with his fancy education and all of his privileges. I think it was both ways, from what I understand.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to him, these were soldiers who didn't know how to dig wood trees. So they were often going to the bathroom in places that were contaminating their own drinking water. So these were not professionals by any stretch of the imagination. And those are sort of basics that an army needs to master, 101, not to kill yourself by going to the bathroom. And yet, on the other hand, he did not appreciate that the average New England soldier who was there, they were sacrificing an incredible amount. They were leaving their farms. Most of them did not have hundreds of enslaved people to take care of their crops. And so by leaving, they were risking their livelihood, they were risking their home, they were risking their families, because they counted on every able-bodied pair of hands to tend to the crops, to pick the crops, to feed their family. And so I think that sacrifice he didn't initially appreciate. I think he came to appreciate it. Now, to be fair to him, he also, I think, looked at this democratic spirit, and there's a lot that is to be commended about the democratic spirit, but also the New England militias were used to picking their officers via election. You don't really want to pick your officer. Correct me if I'm wrong. Don't have military experience. You don't really want to pick your officers that way, because then you tend to pick the most popular person, not necessarily the most skilled person. And they don't particularly want to instill a tough form of discipline, because then that will make their soldiers dislike them. But in the Army, especially when you're fighting a superior force, you really need discipline. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're absolutely right. And this really reflects the militia origins, because as you point out with elections, what happens when the war is over and you go home? Jim and Bob are going to be your neighbors, and guess what? They're going to remember if you were pretty hard on them, and so that creates a reluctance on the part of them. Plus, there's some discomfort. It's like, they're my neighbors. I know them. I feel like I'm putting on airs. It's a really complex thing.
And weren't you talking, is this that about the time when he gave them spittoons?
Not familiar with that, but
Weren't you talking about when he armed himself with an
oh no, I'm talking about spontoons, not spittoons.
That's fantastic.
I'm sorry.
I'm sure they were also using spittoons. We'll circle back to spontoons, to armaments, to uniforms. But to your point, Rick, there's I love it. So on July 4th, 1775, Washington issued his second general order, and these went out to the entire army. And I'm going to read a quote for this because I think it's worth actually sharing their language. So he announces to this group of militias, the Continental Congress, having now taken all the troops of the several colonies which have been raised or which may be hereafter raised for the support and defense of the liberties of America, again, year before independence, into their pay and service, they are now the troops of the United Provinces of North America. And it is hoped that all distinctions of colonies will be laid aside, so that one and the same spirit may animate the whole. And the only contest be who shall render on this great and trying occasion the most essential service to the great and common cause in which we are all engaged. Discuss.
I mean, I think it's a marvel that he was able to articulate the purpose of unity. I'm not sure that nationalism was really in the picture at that point, because the colonies were, pretty ingrained in their own identities. But the fact is, they needed to unify with one another in order to make an effect, to make a difference. And I was telling Lindsay and Rick earlier, at the Army Heritage and Education Center, we have this new exhibition that reproduces the environment to the specific specifications of an 18th century tavern that's modeled after the one that still exists in Sudbury, Massachusetts. And it's the idea is to recreate an environment in which these colonials the humanity of that experience of making this decision of whether or not to rise up and bind together, you know, the Massachusetts folks with the Pennsylvanians, oh my God, right? Or do we allow the British to keep this power over all of us? Because they weren't really in that moment of, hey, I identify with you, even though you're from Virginia. They were thinking, well, how do we find this common cause? And that's what I believe is the spirit of Washington's kind of statement. I don't know if you agree, Rick.
This is very much even aspirational.
Hmm.
Let's see, you know, united provinces. They tried this once before, you know, with the Albany Congress in the mid 1750s, and that went over like a lead balloon. It's like, no, I don't want to get along with you. You read accounts. Pennsylvania soldiers are referred to as Southerners by Connecticut troops. Their accents were so thick, they had difficulty understanding one another. I would love to have a recording, if such a thing were possible, to listen to what a Connecticut soldier and a Pennsylvania soldier, and you know, and later on a South Carolinian, what they sounded like. The regional differences were so intense.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, Washington, let's try and make something out of 13 different, utterly separate colonies.
One of my favorite facts is in 1774, when the first Continental Congress gathered in Philadelphia, more delegates at Philadelphia had been to London than had previously been to Philadelphia. And I love that because, and it wasn't that travel was so difficult between the colonies, but it showed where they were centering themselves, like where they were thinking about their relations. They didn't care about relations to one another. If anything, they were competitive. They were connecting themselves emotionally, economically, culturally to London. And so I think you're right in terms of the aspirational element. You know, when Washington is taking over, he's not only having about what it means to bring these troops together in a fighting force, but this is a moment where they're starting to think about national identity. And, you know, the people who are in the army have decided that they're going to be not British. Whether or not Congress is there yet is a different story, but they've decided they're going to be not British. That's not actually an identity. That's a not thing.
Yeah.
So
What does that mean too? Is that treason?
Exactly.
Like, what is that?
So I think, you know, I brought up this picture of Washington's command flag because in terms of the aspirational elements, at this point in this picture, you can see a little bit the flag up in the right-hand corner was the sort of original flag that was kind of tentatively used at the time. And it was 13 stripes with the Union Jack in the left-hand corner. So not only is that a little confusing on the battlefield, but it really, I think, gets at the midway point of not British, but having not yet defined what American was. And so Washington adopted this flag as his command flag. This was the flag that flew over headquarters. And it is, of course, eventually the flag that Congress adopted as the replacement for the left-hand corner. But to your point, Rick, I think, you know, it is so aspirational. This is what we should be. This is what we are aspiring to be. And I would love for you both to talk about what is the importance, like in a lot of ways, like a flag is not going to win the war, right? A national anthem is not going to win the war, but sometimes these symbolic elements have a huge part to play. So what is the role in the Army of these symbolic elements? How do they start to create a conception of national identity? What is the role of symbolism in this type of thing?
That sounds like an art question.
That is an art question for sure. Well, one of the things, so I'm a trained art historian, as you know, and I really had to kind of wrap my mind around the significance of these flags for the military in general and what they meant and how strongly the Army, if you're in specific, you know, parts of the Army in artillery versus whatever, the flags that's like about half of you are veterans. You know what I'm talking about. It is part of your identity. It is something that people rally around. The campaign stripes. There are so many medals that people earn and that recognize the parts of their service that really mean so much to people. And this is all very, very smart identity building, right? It's not just hey, let's fight for the nation, but it's, hey, you belong to this group. And it's a sense of belonging. And I think, frankly, the U.S. Army does it better than anyone else. In my career as a federal employee, I've really been struck by the sense of belonging that the Army cultivates, specifically in the sense of serving your nation, but you're also serving your community, you're serving your family. It's part of this. And that all goes back to these flags, to the very beginning of Washington's vision. He was so visionary in that sense of creating something that would signify a sense of belonging. And that is what these colonials needed. I mean, obviously, they were not belonging to Britain.
Yeah, and when you look at the command flag, you've got this unifying field of blue, but there's also a representation or recognition of the 13 different colonies, later states, in the stars. They're unified by being put against that field of blue. You know, and where Kate was talking about regimental colors, things like that. And if I can give a shout out to the Museum of the American Revolution, it's got a fantastic exhibition of regimental colors. It's the largest collection of flags, colors from this period.
Didn't Laura, your wife, want to see a specific one? Wasn't she really interested in?
I can't remember.
It was like specific to her city, though. I mean, it was very personal in the sense of like, hey, this is where I grew up, and this is their.
Probably her family, because she's from Milwaukee. Nobody heard of that then.
Wow.
But no, but the you know when you look at them, the different flags of the different regiments, they really are demonstrations, the manifestations of the nature of American society at that time. There's no uniformity to them. It's like, this is what we look like. And you've got all these different, sometimes bizarre designs, and they're particular to each regiment.
Yeah.
And so, you know, for the British, pretty standardized. You've got the King's color, and then you've got each with the regimental color, and there are variations. I won't go into the details unless you really want me to. But those embody the imagined community. They embody the community made real through service. And so they become part of those soldiers' identities. For the artillery at this period, it was in their guns. They didn't carry colors. So these become very direct, physical, symbolic manifestations of who these soldiers were and what they proclaim themselves to be.
Hey, can you talk to us a little bit about, and I can do this one.
I'd love to see the Lansdowne. But
Yeah.
we might not be there yet.
Yeah, let's wait on that one. But in terms of the uniform, like, what are some of the choices that we should note in terms of, you know, coloring, in terms of presentation, in terms of what is this depicting and why is it depicting it in this way? What are we trying to achieve with some of these things?
Well, you have, like what you were saying earlier, and I know that Rick has written about this painting, so I'd love to hear from you. But there is a lot about his military importance. And the fact is that, you know, the setting is about the training of the soldiers. So he's got the big gun, which we all know is a symbol of power. It's very masculine. There's lots of different kinds of proclamations in terms of his importance. And then what Rick was saying earlier about the buff and blue, that's a specific nod, right, to his where he was stationed in the military at these various points in his life. And that is so important for the development of a leader in the United States. It holds true to Eisenhower, right? That there is some kind of military experience that these leaders who eventually, you know, in Washington and Eisenhower's case, become presidents. So it's interesting to see this in line with later portraits of Washington. But I'd love to hear what your interpretation is.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they're both wonderful portraits by Charles Wilson Peale. The one over my right shoulder, he's on Dorchester Heights, and you've got Charlestown in the background. His sword hilt is pointing, directing your eyes toward it. But he's posing, and this goes back to ancient Rome by putting your hand inside your toga, later on inside your waistcoat, your vest. That is meant as a demonstration of
Like
one's
gangster signs.
gravitas. What's that?
In the Renaissance, there's also like
Yes.
this. They have these little like crossed fingers. I mean, they're
Oh,
very,
yeah.
very in that tradition of kind of, I'm a man, a gentleman.
Yeah, and that's what he's doing. Is I'm a man of gravitas, but also if you were to look at the full portrait, you'd see that Washington is standing, and I can't remember the exact pose, but yeah, well, not this one, but
Oh, that one's good.
yeah, and the other one is that he's in a particular pose. It's a dancing pose, and I cannot
Is it this
recall
one, Rick? Is it
this
where
one.
he's holding the sword?
That's it right here.
Yeah.
That's a dancing pose. It goes back to the 16th, 17th century.
I think fencing is like dancing, isn't it? Like
What's that?
fencing is like dancing
It yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Not chicken butt.
You intend to slay someone one way or the other.
Well, and
But-
Kate, to your point earlier about masculinity, so the two qualities that were considered to be the most important abilities for a man in the 18th century were your ability to sit on a horse and dancing. Those were the qualities that defined what it meant to be an elite and powerful man. And so, Jefferson at one point wrote that Washington was the greatest horseman of the age. And when Jefferson said that, he was not particularly inclined to give compliments to Washington. So it means a lot. And he was considered to be a phenomenal dancer. So even during the war, when they would have winter quarters and it was the slow season in campaign, a lot of the wives would come and they would have holiday balls and they would, do fun activities. And Washington would dance with all the women because he was such a good dancer.
Yeah, if let's see, what is this one here is Prince, and so he's he's holding his sword like he's a conductor. He's directing battle. You've got officers. Why am I drawing a blank on the one who died? Commands a brigade. Yes, Mercer. Thank you so much. Having a brain cramp.
Love having an educated audience. Wonderful.
This is participatory.
Yes.
But yeah, but he's directing it. The one previous for Princeton, where he's got his resting his hand on the barrel of the cannon. You've got those red colors. Those are the old symbol for the colonies. A red field with the Union Jack and the canton. He's also got here, stacked off on the lower side, you've got various enemy regimental colors. We've taken them, they're ours. That demonstrates it. You look at the soldiers behind him, one of them is restraining a horse, that power, energy. They're also bayonets at the ready. This army's ready to fight, so it's tremendous. You've got in the background Nassau Hall for the College of New Jersey, today's Princeton University. You want me to tell that story?
You're a big princess.
Yes, well, absolutely. And we should also transition into spittoon versus spittoon.
Okay. Yeah. So now,
Yes,
Tell us
Nass-
my brain cramp.
but no, Nassau Hall is a great story. And I think as we're talking about symbolism, it's a perfect time to do that.
during the Battle of Princeton, there's a story. I don't know if it's true, but it should be.
It doesn't matter really.
Yeah,
It's symbolic. That's
yeah.
the important part.
This is like the man who shot Liberty Valance. This is the Western Princeton legend. So Alexander Hamilton's company of artillery comes up and it's bombarding Nassau Hall to drive, I think it's about 140 British soldiers inside the building, get them to come out and surrender. According to the story, one of the balls decapitates the portrait of George II. Now, fast forward to the end of the war. The trustees of the college vote to commission a portrait by Charles Wilson Peale of Washington. They're thrifty. So what they do is saw off all the royal emblems from this frame, and they replace the Royal George with the Republican George. What better way of saying we've got a republic? We're no longer part of a monarchy. We'll have no kings.
Yes, so spittoon, spittoon. So that is not the only other time that they make a very symbolic choice.
We have
So
to tell this other story.
yes, so Rick was telling us, we had dinner earlier, which was lovely, and Rick was telling us that in the 7 Years' War, when Washington was, I wish I had this portrait, I do not, the famous 7 Years War portrait of George Washington. He's a young man, you can see that he has sort of reddish brown hair, and he has a musket with him. And it, as Rick was telling us, it is not a hunting musket. I'm going to allow you to tell the particulars of what kind of musket it is, because that is not my specialty. But he does an inversion with his officers. So pick it up with what kind of musket, and then
Sure.
what is the inversion?
This is really nerd stuff, so forgive me. But we
We're
all
in good company.
It's Washington's first portrait. Charles Wilson Peale paints him for the first time, and we often read that it's a fowling piece. In other words, a musket meant for shooting birds, generally ducks. No, it's not. If you play with it on a computer, the imagery, and you lighten it up, you can pick out the bands retaining the musket that keep the wooden stock and the metal barrel together. You've got swivels on there. Those swivels are for a sling. It's an officer's musket, a fusil, a light musket, not a fowling piece. And it's something that's privately purchased by officers. Fast forward, and there's kind of an irony in this to me, Washington enjoins the company grade officers, the captains, the lieutenants, and the ensigns. Yeah, ensign's Navy rank today, but ensign back then meant generally the junior lieutenant who would carry a flag or who might carry a flag, and ensign. So he enjoins them. Stop carrying fusils, stop carrying muskets. I want you to carry spontoons as badges of rank, office. They're basically short spears that can be used to give direction, or they can be used to dress a line, to get soldiers back into line. If you need to go stickety-stickety, you've also got that ability. Now, the British Army is doing just the opposite. It's like, stop carrying spontoons, stop wearing gorgets, this moon-shaped brass piece of vestigial armor that marks an officer, because it makes you stand out. Carry fusils so you look more like your men. So you get this really interesting piece. And Washington wants to get his officers to understand what officership is. In part, and this is not, it's theater. That doesn't mean that it's false, but in part it is acting the role, demonstrating to your soldiers what one should be like. And this is what Washington's trying to get across in part.
He had vision.
He did. He
That's
did.
vision.
Well, one of the reasons that I think he had long-term vision, and I think this was shared by a number of his soldiers, is the Army had a unique nationalistic experience during the war. Nationalism was not really a thing yet, but they were getting close because the Army fought in Massachusetts, they fought in New York, they fought in Pennsylvania, they fought in the Carolinas, they fought in Virginia. Very few Americans were having that continental experience. And so not only were they seeing the country, but they were interacting with people that were different from them in a way that I think not many Americans had the opportunity to do. And hardship during the war was a great equalizer. It erased, if you are all sweating it out in tents and dealing with biting flies and mosquitoes in the summer, you're going to be bit no matter whether you're from Georgia, you're from Massachusetts. And in the winter, if you don't have shoes, maybe I guess if you're from Massachusetts, you're a little bit more used to the cold than if you're from South Carolina, but you're still going to be cold no matter where you're from. And so there's a great equalizing. And there's also, I think, a great realization among the officer corps that they were sacrificing for this national project. And they developed a conviction that Congress was not up to the task. And that I think is particularly important as we start to talk about the nation building side of things, which is where we're going to transition next. Not all veterans became Federalists, but most Federalists were veterans, especially in the officer corps. And my theory is that they had seen what happens if you don't have a strong government. They had seen what happens if you don't have strong centralized authority that can act decisively, especially in moments of crisis. And so the Army, in a lot of ways, one of the sort of the political rules of the universe is that the government has the right to use force. That is sort of one of the things about government, is they have the controlled right to use force. And the Continental Congress adopts that. But they also, the army becomes then a form of this first step towards nation building, both as an identity, but also building the institutions and protecting the values or fighting for the values for which they believe they had sacrificed, including perhaps most famously, or in some cases infamously, in the early republic, the Society for Cincinnati. So Rick, could you tell us a little bit, as an honorary member, what is the Society of Cincinnati? What is its role sort of in nation building, and why does it matter?
Yeah, the Society of Cincinnati today, forgive me, I need water. It's a hereditary society. It is the eldest male descended from an officer in the Continental Army or the Continental Navy or the incredibly minuscule Continental Marine Corps, but also French officers who served here in what becomes the United States. It passes on to the eldest son. If there are no males, it will then go to a collateral line to keep the society alive. It's originally meant to try and retain and foster the spirit of brotherhood, what they had known during the war. As Lindsay pointed out, traipsing across the eastern seaboard and even beyond had built up camaraderie. They got to see that we have more in common with one another than not. They also understand, as she pointed out, the power of, or the necessity of a stronger government. But they want to maintain this fraternal spirit. Today, the Cincinnati still exists. It's headquartered at Anderson House in nearby DC, open to the public to tour. It's now dedicated more to education and maintaining these bonds of fraternity through the descendants of these officers. I've had the chance, for me it's really cool because I got to write about these guys. I've had the chance to become friends with the descendant of Captain John Barry of the Continental Navy. I mean, how cool is that? I met a fellow who's a descendant of Colonel Richard Butler, who commanded the 9th Pennsylvania. If I look out of my apartment in Carlisle to the northwest, I can see the site where his house was. That is just really cool. And others, Ephraim Blaine, his post-war house, beautiful Georgian, just sold recently on High Street, on Hanover, north of High, on the west side of the street. I wrote about him too. So meeting all of these fellows, and they are really dedicated to educating the public and getting the word out about our collective American Revolution. Even if your family wasn't here, who cares? Even if you weren't born here, if you're a naturalized citizen, we're a country based upon ideas, not race or religion. And so this is part of the mission of the Cincinnati, to remind us who and what we are.
So it's not so elite.
It's exclusive because of the hereditary piece. These are some of the most welcoming gentlemen that I have met. And you know, I have really enjoyed getting to know them, and I was really tickled that they would think to elect me an honorary member.
So before we move on to this painting, just a reminder, I do have some excellent questions. Thank you for those. But if you want to add to the list, be sure to use the QR code. So basing a country on an idea is an incredibly hard thing to do. It's not really done elsewhere in the world. It can be incredibly messy because everyone is going to have a different concept about how to interpret that idea, how to live that idea, how to enforce that idea. And so it's been a very messy and a quarrelsome nation from the beginning. That is very much our inheritance. And so certainly the symbolic and the imagery that we were showing in terms of Washington's command was essential to establishing his power and his command, but also for helping people understand what the stakes were. And that very much continues into the presidency when you are trying to build a new federal government and get people to care what it has to say. That is particularly important when you have a federal government whose most of the decisions and most of the institutions and most of the practices are not enforced with military might. Most of our republic depends on civilians buying in and their goodwill to continue. So with that in mind, Kate, talk to us about this portrait and what it contributes to that process.
This is a 1796 Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington made for the Marquess of Lansdowne. It was bought by who's Pennsylvania businessman and offered as a gift as a kind of, hey, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine, because the Jay Treaty, which was ratified in 1796, was all about allowing trade between Britain and the United States. So there was a lot at stake with the commerce and business. You can imagine kind of this relationship building, right? And what better relationship, diplomatic kind of gesture than to have the renowned Gilbert Stuart paint a portrait of George Washington and offer it as a gift to your business partner across the pond. And so there's a legitimacy that Washington demonstrates as he is president in this portrait. And that legitimacy, if you look around and think about his army career, is the sword. So he has his officer's sword, and that points to his service and how he has earned the respect through nation building. Army history is American history, I always like to say. And so he's gesturing in that oratorical kind of Roman gesture to open up the discussion. Imagine who he's talking to. And it's to try to argue with Congress that, hey guys, why don't you vote for this thing? Please come with me. Hear me out. Listen to my statement. Listen to my rationale. So you see this diplomatic gesture that he's making. And then there's all these signifiers, that the portrait includes, including these two books on the bottom that point to the future. They're the Federalist Papers and the Papers of Congress. So it's very interesting to think about the politics of that moment. And Lindsay has been referring to the Federalists and cited Cincinnati, and I thought it was kind of an interesting tie-in. And then on the desk are other documents that he signed in order to establish the presidency and to kind of create, sort of the bed upon which, he's kind of building the government. But the way in which Stuart communicates Washington's optimism is in that neoclassical column. There's a little rainbow behind it. So you all know if there's a storm, it's bad news, right? But if it's a rainbow, okay, there's like bright, cheery days ahead. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is his velvet gentleman's costume. So his overcoat is not that of a military official. And he very well could have put that on and made that decision. Often when presidents pose for portraits, they'll choose one signifier. Like LBJ had the Silver Cross from his service in World War II. And McKinley had a rosette of the Military Order of the Royal Legion of the United States for a portrait that he sat for, a photographic portrait. Washington chooses a very beautiful but well-known kind of customary gentleman's overcoat frock that's velvet and has his beautiful lace cuffs. He's adorned as a man of consequence, but not in the military context. And that is super important because the United States is a democracy, right? We don't have military leaders leading our nation and making government decisions. We have military leaders who follow the decisions of the president. But that is a really important point of Washington's demonstration of what it meant to be president. Remember, nobody had been president before him. This is the template that he's setting. And he's communicating it through these portraits. And then, of course, prints and prints and prints were made. And everyone wanted to know what Washington looked like. And so there's this whole iconic status that he achieved through all these portraits that were sold of him. Some of them were like after he died, you know, he's like ascending up to heaven like a little pootie. I mean, it's kind of crazy, the kind of portraits that you'll see of him made throughout his life.
Well, I think, what's so interesting about this portrait, I don't know if any of you have heard me talk about this portrait, and I compare it to the first presidential portrait of John Adams. So the first presidential portrait of John Adams by William Winstanley is absolutely ghastly. It's horrible. I wish I had thought to bring a picture of it, because it basically takes, and so the reason it is so bad, and you look at it and you're like, this looks weird. Why does this look off like this? It basically puts John Adams' head on Washington's body. And it's like the body from this military portrait here. And so the proportions are all wrong. It looks totally off, but it also replicates most of the background. Similar table, similar tablecloth, similar carpet, similar columns, similar drapes. And to Kate's point, it is a demonstration that they only had one way to visualize the president. They hadn't yet figured out how the office would work for other people. And so in terms of the portraiture, they're replicating what they know as a way to try and provide some continuity and institutional stability and sort of legitimacy to this next go round. So with that, I now want to turn to some of your questions. And there are so many excellent ones here. I don't even really know where to begin. So thank you all so much. So Heather Haley asks, why was Washington painted wearing black? Was it considered a mourning color? I find it very striking. So this was an excellent question to me, and Kate, you may know better than I do. So black was a mourning color, but it wasn't necessarily only a mourning color. So Washington wore a black suit for most of his presidency. He wore a black velvet suit. And it was, I think, more of just like a regal color without being traditionally royal.
It's also a show-off for Gilbert Stuart.
Yeah.
If you know like the man ice skating that Gilbert Stuart painted, I mean, and it's in the Met, so next time you're in New York, but there's this kind of artist's, flex, if you will, when they paint velvet like that. That's showing, and so Stuart studied with Benjamin West. He's highly trained. He's one of the best artists of his moment, really. So to paint velvet and to paint the lace cups and with such a flourish, it's kind of, that's a badass move for an artist.
Yeah, it's both an artist flex and it's also a wealth flex, because velvet was
the
not
velvet.
cheap. And
Yeah,
so to
exactly.
be able to afford a velvet suit was a certain prestige. Okay, Rick, so Bob Klassen, I want to make sure I got that. I think I said that correctly. Clayton, hello, Bob Clayton. Asks, today's military emphasizes training from day one. George Washington did not have an Army War College. So how did he grow into his role as commander-in-chief? And I would add to that, to mimic another question here on the list, what sort of training did he put into place to take the dirty and mean army that he inherited and turn it into maybe not quite the fighting force of the British, but good enough to get the job done?
Yeah, good enough. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of good enough. He, that's not my quotation, that's the Marshal de Saxe, a French officer. But a lot of it's on the job training. A lot of it is reading manuals of the period. They tended to read a lot of ancient military history. They found that was much more valuable than reading about, say, Frederick the Great. They had a greater reverence for the ancient world. But when it came to actually training soldiers, the Army's trying to figure it out. Every regiment pretty much did its own thing. One of the most popular manuals is Humphrey Bland's, I think 1764.
Of which there's the original copy that Washington owned in vault.
Oh, cool.
That is
So,
cool.
so you've got, so Bland is one of the most popular ones, and they'll work off of that. What will happen, and we fast forward to the entrance of the Baron de Stuyven. I know it's we more popularly know him as Fawn. He actually preferred de, the French de, D-E, because he adopted the rank that was recognizable to Americans, barren, because nobody in the U.S. or what becomes the U.S. would understand what Freiherr means.
Maybe it's a thing.
You know, yeah, maybe some. It's like, you know, do you need to spit something up? So if you're going to be a baron, you should have de, not von. And this is very common among the German aristocrats of the era. You'll see this. There's a general Leopold von Heister. No, it's de Heister. That's how he signs it. So I will go with what Steuben wanted, not Steuben, Steuben. So Steuben simplifies and regularizes drill for the Army. He doesn't invent it, but he makes it simple enough for guys who are going to enlist, be pressed into service in some cases, to make it easy. He starts out with Washington's lifeguard at Valley Forge, his personal escort, and they become trainers. And then he takes small groups from all the brigades in the Army, teaches them. He's really adept at swearing in German and French, and the troops love it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he could speak in all the different languages.
except English.
Where words translate very nicely.
Yeah.
But you know, Kate's been talking about Washington in his portrait. One observer says that Steuben looks like an absolute god of war. He is decked out in his finery, and this is meant to impress upon the soldiers. I'm a soldier, damn it, I'm a soldier's soldier. And so he teaches them how to go through it and how to do this. They learn how to become soldiers. The parade ground stuff is vital at this time because that's how you did it. And so they will eventually do this and continue doing it. And what becomes known as his Blue Book continues into the early 19th century. And today, every sergeant major in the U.S. Army gets a copy of the Blue Book to remind him and her what their role is in taking care of their soldiers.
And National Museum of the U.S. Army, just around the corner at Fort Belvoir, they have a nice little film about him and a great exhibition on the Red War.
So Julie asked a great question, which I'm going to steal. And she asked, can you touch on GW's amazing ability to recognize potential in somewhat unlikely figures? I always loved teaching my students about Nathaniel Greene and Henry Knox. So for those of you who attended the Rick Atkinson event, he thinks that Nathaniel Greene was probably the second only to Washington in terms of his military ability as a general. Had he lived, he would have been one of the most pivotal figures in the early republic. One of Washington's great abilities was to see talent where maybe it would be unexpected. So who would have expected a portly bookseller from Massachusetts to become the king of American artillery and turn into sort of this genius innovator of how to use artillery in a new way? And that was, of course, Henry Knox. Who would have thought that what is the opening line? Now I got to get it right. Bastard son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot. You know, I'm talking about would become the genius of American finance. So he had the ability to see talent where talent was, and that does not just apply to his officer corps. So one thing I want to make sure we mention is by the end of the Revolutionary War, 30% of the Continental Army were Black Americans. And some were free Black Americans, some were enslaved, some were fighting for their own freedom. And not only is this composition, I think, a reflection of Washington's evolution in thinking about the role of Black Americans in the Army, but also a recognition that when you have someone who is, of course, fighting for the cause of independence, but is also fighting for their own freedom, they're going to be incredible soldiers. They're not going to leave because they don't have anywhere to return to. And that is kind of a dark motivation, but his ability to see that talent, to see that they were fighting with valor and bravery was important and essential to victory. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that and brought that in as part of the story. There's a question here from John Page, which shows a real knowledge about the Continental Army, which is surveying Washington's leadership of the First Continental Army, 1775 to 1776. what do you consider Washington's greatest success and his greatest shortcoming? So I think I might expand that out a little bit. We certainly can talk about the first Continental Army, but in general, what would you consider to be Washington's greatest strength, and what is Washington's greatest weakness as commander-in-chief?
Ooh, boy, so many things. One is his ability to learn.
Now that's a strength, let's be clear, not a weakness.
No, I mean, yeah, it's a strength. He learns. He begins to learn, and it takes a while, how to earn his soldiers' respect. Through his presence, and he understands that this is part of, I think, the theater of leadership, the theater of command, how he carries himself and shows himself to his soldiers, that this is setting an example to them. Simply keeping this army together, the First Continental Army, is a chore. And there's some pretty great experiences that happen. Probably for me, the signature one is the noble train of artillery. Henry Knox takes the guns, or leads the expedition that takes the guns that were captured at Fort Ticonderoga and brings them to Massachusetts. Washington had gotten word that that William Howe was going to lead an assault to seize Dorchester Heights, which was on the southern edge of Boston Harbor. And what he does is have the troops dig in and they plant guns. And these guns can range the shipping channels. The game's up. Washington understands enough of this. The next trick, if you will, how do I help start building a new army for the next campaign season? And this is working with Congress. He's incredibly deferential to Congress. He establishes the norm of civil control of the military in this country. So he's working with them. He wants a longer term army. It's going to take another year after that to finally get 3-year or for the duration of the war enlistments. But how do I build the next one? And the next one is going to be the one that launches the attack at Trenton. And Washington has his 10 best, he has 10, 11 good tactical days in his life. He's a greater strategist than he is a tactician. No offense, George. But, it's Trenton 1, Trenton 2, steals a march, heads up to Princeton. He bags a brigade of Hessian regulars. I mean, these are good soldiers, not mercenaries, good soldiers. He mauls Charlie Mahood's 4th Brigade at Princeton. He then says, you know what, I'm not going south, I'm heading north. I'm going to set up camp in the Watchung Mountains near Morristown. Come and attack me up here, baby.
Kate, so let's talk about some weaknesses.
Just a side note, Rick was my 1-800 dial historian when I curated the 1898 exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery, because he's so encyclopedic about most things. Anyways, I love it. What was your question?
Weaknesses.
Weaknesses. Oh gosh. Okay. So I could really just only talk about his vision as a strength. I would agree with Rick about the weaknesses in the sense that he's not a good tactician. And yeah, it's interesting. He's renowned for his soldiering career, but if you look at some of the decisions he made, Valley Forge, read Rick's book, that's a lot of mistakes. What do you think was something that he could have avoided, Rick, in Valley Forge, that would be like a weakness maybe turns strength?
I think Valley Forge is, it's a compromise, so nobody's happy, but I think it's a brilliant decision. It mixes political and military strategy together and in order to accomplish the greater task. But his weakness, think about it, is he's thin-skinned. He does not take criticism well. And so the slightest thing just
it's pretty brave, like the Insurrection Act and the putting down the Whiskey Rebellion, federalizing the militia. I mean, that was like no, hands down, no SHIT, like don't,
Oh yeah, and
don't mess with us.
Yeah, it is. But throughout his life, though, He does not deal well with people criticizing him. He's just not, he's not
I
good
don't know,
at
I find
that.
that hard to accept. Maybe that's because I held him up a little bit.
Well, I do want to. Well, I agree with Rick that I think the could hold a grudge, which is part of this criticism thing. Although he was more willing to forgive the criticism in private than public. If it was public, it was much harder to forgive. But I don't want to end on a sour note, so I should have done that in reverse. So I'm going to answer the question for myself as a strength, so as to end on a positive note, which was that I think he had an understanding of what was the game he was playing. And as long as the Army survived, the cause for independence would survive. And the key to the Army's survival was his survival, because Congress referred to the Army as Washington's Army, because they were so loyal to him and his existence. And so he understood that it took him a little while, but he understood that eventually it was not about winning the big battles. It was about avoiding capture, avoiding death, and surviving another day. And so understanding the game you're playing is kind of 101 to Rick's point about strategic long-term vision. So I want to close out by asking you each, I want Kate to talk just, a minute about what is some of the work you're doing at the Army Heritage and Education Center, because I think that's important work for the coming years. And Rick, you've had a long career of teaching the next generation of military leaders. And I would love for you to reflect on some of that work and, why it's so important.
Thank you for that question. So I'm really excited to think about Army history as American history, and what better place to do that than at the premier archive of the U.S. Army that is really thinking about Army history through a biographical focus, and biologic, but biographical. So the collection that the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center has, imagine 5 miles of linear feet of just personal papers from general officers, 1, 2, 3, 4 stars, major influencers in the U.S. Army, from that top level all the way down to the private, who has written a record of his or her experience in war that has changed, the face of politics today. And continues to. And one of the things I'm really proud about the Army Heritage Education Center doing is that we are integrating our archives with the School of Strategic Land Power, which is, we're all part of the Army War College, but we're integrating our primary sources with the teaching of these lieutenant colonels and colonels and equivalents who are the next strategists of military power, who are more important than ever, I would argue. And to think about how land power is critical to view through a historical lens. So you cannot forget history. You cannot, yes, you can study Thucydides and think about the Peloponnesian Wars or Sun Tzu. I understand that there's strategy on that level, but let's also look at Omar Bradley's map of Utah Beach from the D-Day mandates and think about the decisions that were made. We have the entire Bradley that can help us do that. So we are really excited about the fact that we got named by Newsweek to be the top 10 free museum in the nation. I think that there's more to come. There's this kind of antiquated view of Army and military history that disdains it or thinks of it as only bullets and artillery. And don't get me wrong, that's really cool, right? Like I'm into blowing stuff up too.
Lots of things that go boom.
Lots of things that go boom, but there's so much that the Army has been the leader of in terms of progressive kind of change for the better, with desegregation, for example, for incorporating women into leadership, recognizing women who are in combat and making sure that they get paid the same amount of money as men who are in combat. Those things like that. And that was only 2013. So there's a lot of Army history that I would argue is American history, that we should really uphold it as such. And that's what we're doing at the Army Heritage Education Center.
And the next generation.
Oh gosh, tomorrow's my last official day as an Army civilian. The 4th of July, I'm retired, so it's my own Independence Day. But I'll be going on to new adventures. I've been really fortunate in having had students who allowed me to teach them. I can't teach anybody anything unless I'm allowed to. So they open themselves up and suspended disbelief and let me talk to them and let me question them and all the fun things that go on in class, and write sometimes scathing remarks on their lousy papers, or occasionally write on a few of them, I am not displeased. So yeah, I've been incredibly fortunate, and a number of them have become friends. I see at least a couple here. So I've been fortunate. Your Army has got some phenomenal people in it. We all take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But we are your Army still. Just like being an American is based upon ideas.
This will
Not-
defend.
Yeah.
is the
And our motto is
line.
this will defend.
This will defend. Think about what this means.
Wow, that's an amazing place to end. So, our Army, this will defend. Thank you all again for being here tonight. This was sort of a crazy idea I had, and I'm so glad you all agreed, at least in principle, that it was worth doing and coming out for, especially during a holiday week. Please join me in thanking Kate and Rick for being here tonight. And I hope we will see you all again soon. Have a very safe and happy 4th of July. And remember that independence was worth fighting for and requires us all to keep fighting for it every day. Thank you.